Yeah. What does he do?
He's in his residency at OBGYN, and she's a nurse. She's been a nurse 2 years there, and she'll be getting hers eventually, but she's not with the critical care people. She's with cancer, pediatric cancer patients.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess it kind of depends on the area because again, Mike got it and he's a pediatrician, has his practice out here in Santa Clarita, but the good thing is he got it. He was nervous about it. I said, look, if you don't want to get it, I'll get it. I'll pretend to be you and I'll go get your shot. I want to get it.
I'm not allowed to get it. The last 2 times I got a regular flu shot, I ended up in the hospital. And so the doctor said, you're not getting any shots. I'm not going to.
So they already told you?
No vaccines. No. I stopped breathing after the last flu shot in the emergency room in the hospital. So
but they said that even with COVID that they said.
They said no flu, no shots, no vaccines. So
once you have a reaction, you shouldn't do it. Right.
Yeah, that's what my doctor said. I'm not giving it to you. I'm afraid to.
Well, once you have herd immunity, you'll be fine.
Yeah, you all get your shots and I'll be okay.
Right. Let's hope. Yeah. We'll all do it for.
Do it for me.
For Joyce.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna get it as soon as I can.
Good.
I'm trying to figure out how. Well, they said teachers are going to get it. I don't know if I can. I don't spend enough time with the kids probably to qualify.
You are our teacher.
But you're a teacher, Rabbi. You're a teacher.
I know, but I'm not around the kids probably enough to qualify. But who knows? I'd go out of state to get it. By the way, I'm not kidding. I'd go to Arizona or Nevada if I could get it quicker. I don't care. I want to get it. But yeah, I don't have many connections there. Anyways, we're going to get started. I don't know where our other friends are, but we'll let them in when they come in. We always read this portion. Oh, here's some more people. We always read Mikketz during Hanukkah. This is the way the calendar goes. We always read this part of Genesis, and people look for connections to Hanukkah, to the time of year. And let's see what you have to say. There's no obvious connections. I mean, there's people who say, well, this is the perfect portion to read for Hanukkah. My guess is that we could find almost any portion and connect it to Hanukkah or to whatever holiday people will find it. But what's interesting about it is that Hanukkah always has at least one Shabbos, and we read a special Haftarah. We read a special section from the prophets from the prophet Zechariah, but we don't do a special Torah portion because Hanukkah is not a Chag. It's not a festival where you have to take off, from work for. It doesn't require the same kind of observance that Shabbos or holidays do. In the sense, it's not considered a Chag, which is why, by the way, some people won't say Chag Sameach. Some people don't care. They'll say Chag Sameach. But we don't normally say Chag Sameach or Good Yontif for Hanukkah. That's why.
What's the literal translation of that, Rabbi?
What?
What's the literal translation of Chag Sameach?
Chag Sameach means happy holiday, right? Happy Chag, right? So it just means a joyous or happy Chag. But the point is not being Sameach. It's always good to be Sameach. The problem is if it's not a Chag, by a biblical definition, by a biblical Chag, are we allowed to call it a Chag? So what some people say is Chag Hanukkah Sameach, which is happy Hanukkah holiday. So that way they don't say it's a Chag by itself. We don't have another word for holiday besides Chag, but because Chag carries those religious restrictions, some people qualify it like that, or they sometimes say Chag Ha'urim Sameach, happy holiday of lights. But Hanukkah literally means rededication, the rededication of the temple. So that's what Hanukkah means. And technically speaking, when you dedicate a house, you call it a Chanukah Habayit. Hanukkah by itself it means dedication, doesn't mean the dedication of the temple. So, again, it's technically not a Chag. But again, unless you're talking with someone who's very religiously observant, that's never going to come up. But we read this portion from Joseph's story, and what I mentioned last week is that there is a lot of Joseph and the story of Egypt. We talk about how I've kind of said it numerous times, how much of Jacob and Joseph we have. We said the last half of the book of Genesis is all these Jacob-Joseph cycle. We call it the Jacob-Joseph cycle. But it's amazing how many chapters. This is chapter 41. It's amazing to think, well, first of all, it's amazing to think that we're coming to the end of Genesis, but it's interesting to think the last 10 chapters of Genesis all take place with Joseph in Egypt and the events that rotate around that. So again, 10 chapters of the Bible is a lot. I mean, considering what we don't have in the Bible, considering the stories that we like to see or like to know more about, this one seems to be very detailed. So again, you kind of have to, the question of why, why so much focus on this story? Why is this scene, why are these scenes so detailed? I mean, really detailed for Genesis. I mean, we have some situations in Genesis where, 1,000 years passes and we don't hear anything, or we get a genealogy of everybody from Adam to Noah, and it's just a list. It's not, we don't know anything about that. And that's, as you know, thousands of years, literally thousands of years between Adam and Noah, and then thousands of years from Noah to Abraham. We're talking about, 3,000 years, or not 3,000, but 2,000 years or so. And we don't get, we get a few lines. Here, all of this action takes place over just a few years. If we consider Joseph hearing the dream and then what happens, basically happens over, from start to finish, it happens over about 10 years. And so it's not a lot of time that passes, and the scenes are very detailed. So where we left off last week was that Joseph has interprets the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer. I was going to say the butcher, the baker, and the cupbearer. And of course, the cupbearer, he tells him, your dream means that you're going to be taken out of prison and elevated. And to the baker, he says, no, you're going to die. And Joseph says to the cupbearer, just before the guy leaves, remember me when you come out. And the line that actually Joseph says is, when all is well with you, do me the kindness of mentioning me to Pharaoh so as to free me from this place. So Joseph says to the cupbearer, when the time is right, when you're safe, when you feel like, again, when all is well, put in a good word for me. Just do me that favor. And he tells him, because I don't belong here. He doesn't just say, do me a favor because I helped you. Do me a favor because I've been kidnapped. I don't deserve to be here. Well, last line is, the cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him, which, by the way, kind of goes against our Torah portions ending on a happier note. This doesn't really end on a happy note. He didn't remember him. And it not only says he did not, it's interesting what the Torah actually says. V'lo zachar, he didn't remember him. Vayishkachehu. So not only did he not remember, he forgot him. It says both, right? So there's a difference of not doing what you said you were going to do. He didn't remember Joseph. He didn't remember the promise. This says he actually forgot him, which leads some commentators to say that this was divine intervention, that the reason he didn't do it was because the time wasn't right for Joseph to do what he needed to do. He needed to all line up. But in the meantime, this Torah portion says right at the beginning at Mikketz, the word Mikketz is the second word, Vayechi Mikketz, after 2 years' time. So Mikketz has as its root the idea that a period. So Vayehi Mikketz Shnatayim means after 2 years' time. So 2 years had passed. It's translated differently in different places in English because the important concept of the word Mikketz is that time has passed. By the way, talk about how Torah portions speak to us. The concept of Mikketz, of a duration of time. First of all, it seems like this is a fixed time, like this had to happen for 2 more years. Like the whole thing is set up. But there is this sense, especially this year, that we're in the midst of a period of time right now. And we're not quite at the end of it, but we can start to see that we're coming to the end of it. But it's interesting that this time, this unit that we're in the midst of right now, is very much like Joseph being in that dungeon. And maybe we're coming to the close to the end of it, and God willing, it won't be 2 years that we'll be living with this. But of course, the remnants of it will be going on for probably, as we know, for longer than a year. That this, if we look back at this period one day, we're going to use the word Mikketz essentially in Hebrew. That this time was a period of time, and that word would be used to describe this period of time, however long it is. When we look back on it, we would use the word Mikketz. So it's interesting that this period of time, you only can have a Mikketz if there's a duration of something. Otherwise, you just say it was 2 years. Vayehi Shnatayim Yamin, 2 years. But the word Mikketz implies that there's some kind of duration. I just out of curiosity, I don't do this a lot, but let's see if Rashi pointed that out. Yep. As the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation, believe it or not, there's actually an Aramaic translation of the Torah called the Targum. And again, Aramaic and Hebrew are close, but people who spoke Aramaic, which were most of our ancestors 2,000 years ago, they spoke Aramaic. They needed a translation, and the Targum was that. So it also has commentary, and it says as the Targum uses the word misof at the end of, all forms of the noun ketz signify one end or another, the beginning or end of a period. So it can be the beginning of the period, but the connotation is this is a period. And again, it is interesting to think that we are in one of those periods right now where we would use the word Mikketz. So after 2 years' time, 2 years pass, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. When out of the Nile, there came up 7 cows.
Move it back. It's not on the screen totally.
Oh.
You moved it over. The right.
Should be. Is that better?
No, it has to come back. You moved it to
The
your
text.
the text.
Okay.
It's not in the middle of our screen anymore.
Got it?
Where it says to Facebook.
Is that better?
No.
No.
Okay, hold it a second. I'm just going to reshare it.
The Torah portion's all the way to the left.
Huh.
About third
Well,
way.
that's what that. By the way, that's why I don't go to the commentary a lot, because it screws up the page. Is that better?
No, hasn't moved.
Nothing.
How about that? No.
Get rid of the Facebook. If you can't, close the
Uh,
Facebook.
that shouldn't.
That's okay.
How about that?
No,
We can see you
Well, that doesn't help.
and the
How
rest,
about that? No.
nothing.
No.
We can
Listen,
see
I'm
just
not going to do it anymore. Okay.
Well, at least we can see the class and we can see you.
I know. I'm going to get it working. I don't know why. How about now?
no, hasn't moved.
I have no idea why it's doing that. Hold it. I'm just going to stop share.
There's you. Big.
Yeah. Well, let me do it now again. I'll try it this way. Yes.
No, still, it's black.
It says Mark Blazer has started screen sharing, but it's not sharing.
Yeah, it says right now that I am. So I'm right now, I'm not doing anything different. Let me just try one other thing. I'm gonna try one other thing here, which is, let me get a new, let me see. Okay. Hold it a second.
No sound.
Now?
Not yet. Nope.
Just the words that Mark Blazer has started screen sharing. I can see those words.
Yeah, the screen is blank.
This is
Oh,
definitely.
there it is.
Yay.
Don't move.
It's back.
Hallelujah. Praise
Yes.
the Lord.
Yeah,
Success.
that sounds like a Zoom issue, not my computer issue. I would tell you if it was my computer, but my computer was showing it was running the whole time. Anyways, I'm not going to mess around with it anymore. That's
Perfect.
so. So Pharaoh dreamed a dream that he was standing by the Nile. When out of the Nile came up 7 cows, handsome and sturdy, and they grazed in the reed grass. But presently 7 other cows came up from the Nile close behind them, ugly and gaunt, and stood beside the cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome, sturdy cows. And Pharaoh awoke. Okay, so he wakes up. He fell asleep and he dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk. But close behind them sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 solid ears. Then Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. Hine chalom. I just want to look at one thing before. So you've heard the dreams before. We've read them before. You've read them, heard about them.
Mhm.
They sound familiar, hopefully, to everybody. One of the things you may not have noticed before, and maybe I've noticed it, but just didn't really think that much about it. But as I'm looking at it right now, and I've contemplated it this week, I guess I never really noticed that last phrase. Pharaoh awoke, it was a dream. Now we know it's a dream. The narration tells us at the beginning, right? It tells us at the beginning, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. So we know as the readers, the narration tells us that he's dreaming. But based on what we just read, Pharaoh doesn't know it was a dream.
Mm.
Now remember, he did wake up, go back to sleep, and then he dreams again. Now, it's weird. It's a weird phrase. I mean, again, commentators, I looked up the commentary on it. Commentators have noticed that that's a weird phrase. Hine chalom. Oh, it was a dream. You know, the way I kind of read it is that Pharaoh's dream was so real, so vivid, that he woke up and it was so real and so visual and so graphic and so memorable that he was like, oh, it was a dream. And that's what the word Hine Halom, I think indicates, because it says that he woke up.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed that this year, or this time, this reading. And then I noticed something else right before it. It doesn't just say that Pharaoh awoke. It says Vayikatz Paro. You notice the word Vayikatz is the same root as the word Mikketz. It's the same word.
Mm.
It's not just that he woke up. It's that he himself realized that something had changed, that something was different. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just, oh, I had this weird dream. Pharaoh knows that what happened to him just now was not just a dream or a nightmare, because it was so visual, it was so real, it was so powerful, and it was so shattering to him that he was not going to be the same person anymore. Vayikatz paro, that he's now different. Has anybody had a dream like that before?
Yes, I honestly did. I had a dream, and when I opened my door to go outside, I was shocked that there weren't shoes and garbage, because in my dream, I dreamt that the whole walkway leading up to my front door was full of stuff. I think because some neighbors leave trash out when they're not supposed to. And I was really shocked that I said,
How long ago did that happen?
Within the month, within this past month.
Wow. So you just had one of those vivid, those dreams.
His could have been a premonition. Couldn't that have been, would you use that word, premonition?
Well, I would say it's either a premonition or it's a dream that, well, first of all, you remember it, right? It wasn't just like that. The hard thing that we have, of course, is that our dreams evaporate, right? And they evaporate like right in front of us.
Right. I had a very vivid dream like that. And I had it years and years ago, just before we moved to California. We were moving from a 6,000 square foot house to a 3,000 square foot house. And I didn't know how I would do it and what I should get rid of and what I would take. And I dreamed so vividly, sorting out the things in the middle of the night. And when I woke up, I had the answer and I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I was so relieved. I didn't know what I was going to do. I dreamed it and then I was silent.
And how long ago was that?
1977.
So you can see, you remember that dream 43.
I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was so vivid. I moved all night long. I really felt like it, that I dreamed how to move. And then I was relaxed after that. I knew what I was going to do.
So that's even probably more rare, where the answer is in the dream itself, right?
Yes, the answer was there.
Now, the good thing about your dream was, of course, it was a solution.
Yes.
What's interesting about this, as of course, Pharaoh knows the dream
Was the problem.
and he knows it. And that's why the Torah says in the next line, the next morning his spirit was agitated, and he sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. So what's interesting about this phrase, of course, is first of all, he's upset.
Mm-hmm.
His spirit is agitated, and he calls forward the magicians and wise men. Now, again, we translate the word hartume as magicians, and chochmeha as its wise men. And of what's interesting about this, of course, is that there seems to be two different words or two different classes of people here. So one could make the argument that the hartume are wizards or people skilled in magic. But he also calls the wise people, who assumedly are the scientists and the philosophers or the theoreticians, the people who are trying to figure things out. And so what's interesting about it is you can make the argument that Pharaoh calls on all sources, right? He calls on those that have the mystical, magical arts, and also the ones that might be the rational scientists. He tries to draw on all of the wisdom and the power out there. And of course, none of them can help him. You can't get any help from any of these sources. They don't know what's going on. Now, you can make the argument that, we kind of know what's going to happen, but one can make the argument, is it really that hard to figure out what's happening here? In the sense that, like, the two dreams are obviously connected, and you'll see what Joseph does. And we know what Joseph does. One can make the argument, this doesn't make the magicians and wise men of Egypt look that smart or powerful, which of course is in itself a premonition, or in this case, a little bit of a foreshadow of those same people not being able to deal with Moses' power and God's power. But as Moses executes his magic, his miracles, it's the magicians that come out there and try to match him. And at first they can. Remember, when they do the blood plague, they do it. They're like, oh, we know how to do that. So remember, the plagues, when they start out, the Egyptians aren't that impressed, because they say, oh, those are just magic. We can do that. So it's interesting that this is a foreshadowing of that story to some extent too, of the magicians really being inept and capable of matching wits with here Joseph and then later on Moses. So just remember that. But both of them are mentioned. Now, finally, the chief cupbearer then spoke up and said to Pharaoh, I must make mention today of my offenses. So he actually says, I screwed up. And the word there that's used is chatae, the word for chet, transgressions. The things we talk about at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, al chet shehatanu, on the sin or the offense that we've done, the transgression. So he says, I've made a mistake, which, by the way, didn't have to make this mistake, though it seems like it almost is a miracle or something almost divine that he doesn't remember. He forgets. But he realizes now, yeah, I made a promise. Which again, this is a guy who spent time in jail. So when he says I made a mistake, I don't know. You want to lead with that if you're already on shaky ground. But he does. He does. He steps up and says, I made a mistake. And not only that, look what he does. Some people forget this. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and placed me in custody in the house of the chief steward, together with the chief baker. So he actually reminds him of his screw up, his big, well, not a screw up, but his, maybe again, he didn't do anything, but he reminds Pharaoh, you remember that time you threw me in jail? He actually says that to him. He doesn't say, I met this guy or I know of this guy. I mean, think about it. If you met somebody in a really bad environment where you don't want to talk about where you met the guy, and you said, I met this guy, down at the bar, right, the strip club I was at, people would be like, you could have just said, I know this guy. You didn't have to say, I met him and you'll never believe where I met him. He does that. The cupbearer says, this is where I met the guy. I met him when you sent me to jail. And he says, I was there with the chief baker and we had dreams the same night. He and I, each of us, a dream with meaning of its own. A Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the chief steward. And they say right away, a Hebrew youth. And when we told him our dreams, he interpreted them for us, telling each of us the meaning of his dream. And as he interpreted for us, so it came to pass. I was restored to my post and the other was impaled. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed from the dungeon. He had his hair cut, and he changed his clothes, and he appeared before Pharaoh. What we like to also point out, obviously when we get to this line, is that Pharaoh sent for Joseph. Vayishlach Paro. We have that phrase that Jacob sent. When we see the word shalach, it's a pretty important. Something big is going to happen in this phrase because Pharaoh sends for him. He calls Joseph, so he does both. Vayishlach Paro vayikra Yosef. So it wasn't just that he sent for Joseph. Both of those words are used. Vayishlach, vayikra. And then it says, Vayirtsuhu, and he was rushed from the dungeon. It doesn't just say that so Joseph came out, he was rushed from the dungeon. And then, of course, what does it say? He was made ready for Pharaoh, which included getting new clothes. Now, you could say, well, of course, he's been in jail. He's got to get shaved and cleaned up. He's got to look good for Pharaoh. But you can make the argument, hey, we want to show Pharaoh, this guy is literally from the dungeon. So we're going to show you a guy that's, this is real. I mean, this is a really scary thing. They could have brought him out in his prison garb, if you will. But of course, more importantly, this goes along with Joseph's story, which is that his garments, his clothes are part of the scenes. They set the scenes. His coat of many colors, his coat being ripped and blood being put on it, his garment being torn off by Potiphar's wife, and now his clothes of coming out of prison. So the clothes are part of the narrative. They're mentioned, and they have significance in Joseph's story. And now here's the Pharaoh telling Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. Now I've heard it said that you hear a dream and it's to tell its meaning. So if somebody tells you a dream, you know what it means. Leaf toroto. You can tell us it's what it means. You hear the dream, tell its meaning. And Joseph answered Pharaoh saying, it's not me, not I. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. And so he right away says, it's not me, it's God. He doesn't claim responsibility for his gift. He says it's a God-given gift, and it's God who's going to do it. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows and grazed in the reed grass. Presently there followed them 7 other cows, scrawny, ill-formed, and emaciated. Never did I see their likes for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. Right? That's a little bit of his, again, the power of what he's saying, right? And the 7 lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows, the sturdy ones. But when they had consumed them, one could not tell they had consumed them, for they looked just as bad as before. And I awoke. In my other dream, I saw 7 ears of grain, full and healthy, growing on a single stalk. But right behind them sprouted 7 ears, shriveled, thin, and scorched by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 healthy ears. I've told my magicians, but none has an explanation. By the way, right here he says just the magicians. He doesn't say the wise people. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do, what God is about to do. The 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It's the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that followed are 7 years, as also are the 7 empty ears scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have told Pharaoh. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Immediately ahead are 7 years of great abundance in all the land of Egypt. After them will come 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten, as the land is ravaged by famine. No trace of the abundance will be left in the land because of the famine thereafter. It will be very severe. And as for Pharaoh having the same dream twice, it means the matter has been determined by God, and that God will carry it out soon. So he tells Pharaoh, you've had the dream twice, it means it's going to happen. Doesn't mean it might happen, it means it's going to happen. Twice dreaming the same dream, it's happening. God has already decided it. And not only that, it's happening soon. Soon. Nemaher. Quickly. So you got to do something. And you got to do it quick. You got to do it quick. And here's his recommendation. Accordingly, let Pharaoh find a man of discernment and wisdom and set him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers over the land and organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let all the food of these good years that are coming be gathered, and let the grain be collected under Pharaoh's authority as food to be stored in the cities. Let that food be reserved for the land for the 7 years of famine which will come upon the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish in the famine. So that is Joseph's recommendation. Now, this might be the reason why, again, we go back to the wise people, because here it says, let Pharaoh find wise people. The wise people, or a wise person in this case. He doesn't say magicians. He doesn't say go find magicians. You need to find people who can do the scientific work of figuring out how to do this. You need to have the people not to make magic and to do tricks, but to actually do the work. And let them be capable people. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is tough, because the work that Pharaoh asked him to do so far, and the work that a dream interpreter would normally be doing, one could make the argument is very mystical, magical work. And so it's the realm of the unknown. It's the realm of miracles, if you will. But there's a component of this, but there's a science here, and you have to take care of the science. You have to take care of the bureaucracy and the details of this. You can't leave this to magic. You can't make this go away by saying a spell or praying real hard or using some kinds of weird, rituals. That won't work. You've got to actually do the work, and you've got to have really smart people helping you with this. Now, one can make the argument that Pharaoh, that he's trying to jockey for himself to be that person. I mean, it wouldn't be strange. You wouldn't be the first people to assume that Joseph is here trying to get his next job. But I want you to consider for a second this factor. Joseph has established himself as a dream interpreter. He's more in the realm of the magicians. Yet he's really trying to be the more scientific and rational advisor. One could imagine that in the ancient world, especially, there was a jockeying of position between those who were spiritual or religious or magical advisors and those that were more practical bureaucrats. That especially in periods where a lot of hope, energy, belief was put in the magical and in the religious and in the unknown, that those struggles between people who were more scientific and more magical probably were pretty difficult answers, and that the people who probably were the most successful were the ones who kind of straddled both. The people who had a little bit of a magical quality, but also were wise, that used a little bit of magic and a little bit of science together. So I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about the ways that still plays out even today with leadership and with the people that we turn to, and the kinds of decisions that we try to make in really scary times, which again, you can make the argument now is one of those scary times.
That's what economic forecasters do. It's as though they magically say what's going to happen next, and they want to be in charge of the finances there.
Correct. So the issue is that 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago, Joyce, if a guy was the king or the duke or whatever, chances are he had those people that were trying to advise him on what they thought the best crops to plant based on what was needed, what people were talking about, what the market looked like. And then you had other people who came and advised him and said, because these birds just flew over our kingdom, it's a good indicator that it's a good time to plant so and so. And what's interesting, of course, is that sometimes those weird kinds of observations actually turned out to be true, because even though they didn't seem to be based on science, they sometimes were, because they were indicators of weather patterns, or they were indicators of what was going on in the natural world. Sometimes by observing animals and changes in flora and fauna, that you could make good, actually scientific guesses. But sometimes they were just plain old superstitions. There's no basis for those kinds of Bubba Mices at all.
Well, that's what the Farmer's Almanac does every year. It forecasts.
Absolutely. That's the perfect example.
Right.
So the Farmer's Almanac is called the Farmer's Almanac because it was for farmers. It wasn't based on, it wasn't always based on science, obviously, but the farmers who bought it were looking to it as a guide.
Right.
So it really was for farmers to try to know what to plant and when to plant it.
Mm-hmm.
So
you'll have those profits.
Those guides were really, really important. And, we kind of take for granted today that we have satellite imaging and we know a lot more about weather patterns than we did. But there also is, and again, nowadays we're even looking at weather patterns. We can look at an El Nino cycle and those kinds of things, and we can make some guesses, better educated guesses. But there's still some things out there that we don't know. And again, we know it because we watch CNNBC or Fox Business or whatever channel we watch for business take. My wife and I just did our allocation for next year of our mutual funds. We don't know. We're looking at 1 year, 10 years. We're looking at lifetimes. What? Who knows? Who knows what the market's going to be like? And it's those kind of moments where you're like, I wish I had the knowledge. I wish I had the magic. I wish I had the crystal ball to know for sure what to do. And the reality is that nobody does, because if they did, they'd have the secret and everybody else would be following it. Look, there are people who are good at doing this. There's a reason why he's called the Wizard of Omaha, right? Warren Buffett has been monstrously successful, unlike lots of other people who have run companies and have taken on huge risks of capital and time. He's made his success by betting on companies, by picking the companies that he thinks are going to be good. And of course, hedge fund managers and asset managers today get paid a lot of money to make these decisions. But in the reality is that a lot of times they're guessing. And what we still deal with is
they're up and down.
What?
Sometimes they're up and down. They're not all accurate. They have good years and bad.
And they can't always be accurate, right? They can't, because any of these people that would be accurate, then again, everybody would be following. And look, there are people that follow Warren Buffett, which is why Berkshire Hathaway is such a wonderful fund to be a part of. But you know what? The reality is that nobody's perfect and nobody is 100% great at it. But there are obvious examples of people who have been very good at it over time. Our world is different in a lot of ways, but some things have not changed. And when those years of famine and plenty, how those are going to follow each other, we don't know. But I will tell you this. One of the lessons from this, which is, at least I've observed in my years, and some of you who are older, I hope, can also testify to this. These things oftentimes come in waves.
Mm-hmm.
That there'll be a bad couple of years, and then there'll be a good couple years. It's very rarely 1 year, bad year, next year, good year. It's very rarely up and down like that. It's usually, again, a cycle. And we talk about those cycles in real estate or in stocks. And that hasn't changed. The idea that there's going to be some good years followed by some bad years and hopefully then by some good years, that's what being in, any kind of investment or business is all about. Being there for the long haul and not being frustrated by some bad years. And that's one of the things we take away from this story is that, Joseph, for all of his gifts and all of his God-given gifts, which are, I don't call them magic because they're true miracles, he really does become successful, not because of just being able to interpret the dreams, but by being able to give this advice and being able to be wise. So he is both a magician to some extent, a miracle worker, and a wise person together.
And a practical person.
Yep. And this is what Joseph has done. He was born with the magical gifts. You know that. We read that a couple of weeks ago when he interprets his own dream, which, by the way, is another issue. When he's all about him, it doesn't work out well, but we know he's born with these gifts. We know he has these gifts. But what he's learned is he's matured.
Mhm.
And he's now a person who's wise and who can give good advice and is helping others with his powers, not just
Mhm.
using them for himself. And so he tells Pharaoh right away what to do. He doesn't just tell him the dream, he tells him what to do. And the plan pleased Pharaoh and all his courtiers. And Pharaoh said to his courtiers, can we find another man like him? A man in whom is the Spirit of God, and Ish Asher Ruach Elohim. Is there anybody else in whom is the Spirit of God? Now, what's so weird about this is it seems like Pharaoh now believes in God because he says God. Now, you could say, well, he maybe meant his gods, whatever. He doesn't say that. He uses the word, Pharaoh says the word Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God. Very interesting there. This Pharaoh seems to be a believer now. And he says, again, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is none so discerning and wise as you. And again, that word, chacham, wise.
Mhm.
You shall be in charge of my court, and by your command shall all my people be directed. Only with the respect to the throne shall I be superior to you. Again, when you consider what Pharaoh just did, he just said to Joseph, you're in charge. I'm the king. I'm the one who's on the throne. I'm still Pharaoh, but I just given you all the power. And he said to Joseph, I put you in charge of all the land of Egypt. I've given you Eretz Mitzrayim. I've given you the land of Egypt. And the words are almost like God speaking to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or speaking to the Israelites. Re'eh natati. Look here. I put this land for you. I've given you this land. It's the same words that God says to us when he says, I'm giving you the land of Canaan. I'm giving you this land. I'm giving you the land of Mitzrayim. Joseph was just given the land. And removing his signet from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. He gives him the signet or the ring, the signet ring. And he had him dressed in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. So as nice as the garments are that Joseph had when he came before Pharaoh, Pharaoh puts him into even better garments.
Right.
And there you have the clothes again. Now the clothes, the robes of authority. This is Joseph's real coat of many colors. The coat of authority in charge of Egypt. Big day, Shesh. This is the royal robes. It's very reminiscent, by the way, to something that happens to one of the descendants of Rachel much later on, right? Mordecai ends up being put in charge after Haman is executed. Mordecai gets put in charge of Persia.
Mhm.
So it's a little reminiscent of what happens here with Joseph. But remember, Joseph got put in charge of Pharaoh's for the entire country. He was put in charge of the prison. He was put in charge of Potiphar's house. Joseph has risen to the top once again, except now he's the second most powerful person in the world, because at the time, Egypt was the most important empire. So when we talk about Joseph right now, what happened to Joseph? He's become the second most powerful, though arguably really the man in charge, because Pharaoh just said, I'm putting you in charge of the greatest empire of the world at the time. And we all know that. And we know it thousands of years later that the Egyptians were so far advanced at this time, so much more powerful than any other country. The Sumerians, the Babylonians at this time were not nearly as powerful as the Egyptians, not even close. The Egyptians were far and away advanced. Again, we almost think that they must have been visited by aliens because of the technology and the stuff that they had that other people didn't have. The Egyptians have now put a Hebrew in charge of their country. He made him ride in the chariot of his second in command, and they cried before him, Abrek, which means bow. Bow, Avrech, which is the same root as Baruch, which is to bend the knee. Thus he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Again, same phrase. Noten oto, he gave him Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, yet without you, no one shall lift up a hand or foot in the land of Egypt. It couldn't be more clear. Joseph's in charge. Repeated over and over again. Pharaoh then gave Joseph the name Zaphanath Paneah, which essentially means something like the face of the Holy One, or the power of the face. And he gave him for a wife Osanat, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On. Thus Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt. Now, what's interesting about this is that the name is very close to Potiphar.
Mhm.
Some people say that this is the same guy, Potiphar. There are other people who say Potiphera is more of a title, or a name, or a more common name. This guy doesn't seem to be the same Potiphar, because this guy is a priest, which is interesting because that means he was a pagan leader of Egypt. And priests were very important in ancient Egypt. They had a lot of power.
Mhm.
They were on a whole nother level, strata of society. And so Joseph marries into a very powerful family. Assumedly, again, not a royal family, but a leadership family. And his daughter's name is Osanat, Potiphar's daughter. So we learn about this woman, not a lot about her, not even that Joseph wanted to marry her. Didn't matter. Pharaoh's choice. Pharaoh says, this is who I'm marrying you off to. Now, again, there's a question of how does Joseph end up marrying a daughter of a priest? Doesn't seem kosher. And there are different traditions about what happens here. There is a midrash that Osnat is none other than his niece. Wouldn't have been necessarily prohibited union, but the rabbis love this idea that when Dinah was forcibly raped or assaulted by Shechem, that they had a kid, they had a daughter, and that daughter was magically taken to Potipharah to raise. Rabbis didn't like the idea that Osnat was not a Hebrew lady. So they don't like that. And so maybe this is really one of his own kind. That's where that midrash comes from. There's another possibility that this is indeed Potiphar, that same Potiphar who had a wife who couldn't keep her hands off of Joseph. And one of the interesting kinds of takeaways from that midrash is that it's kind of weird, because you think the mother-in-law might still have the hots for him, but that at least this woman, she didn't get to have Joseph. She couldn't have Joseph. She was a married lady, but her daughter could be with Joseph. So I don't know that would make her feel better, but there's an understanding that would have made her feel better. At least her daughter gets to marry Joseph. I don't know if you like that midrash, but that is another possibility. The rabbis definitely don't like the fact that this woman comes from out of nowhere and is indeed, according to this, the daughter of a priest. But of course, it's consistent with what we read about Moses, who in our next book of the Bible, at the beginning of Exodus, right, in chapter 2, not too far away, marries Yitro's daughter, Yitro, who was a priest of Midian, another pagan priest. So these Jewish characters who end up marrying the reverend's daughter, so to speak, it's an interesting juxtaposition of somebody who you wouldn't expect marrying somebody who is, again, not just pagan, but high up pagan. Now it tells Joseph.
Didn't they almost have to then, so that there wouldn't be genetic bad things happening? Didn't they have to bring in more people from areas that they weren't incestuous with?
You could make that argument. That's not an argument that they seem to have an issue with, right? They don't seem to have an issue with having people marry within the family. They actually seem to prefer that, to the rabbis at least, than marrying somebody outside of the people. But yeah, you're right. From what we know about today about genetics, this would have been a good thing.
Right.
But it's not just that they marry Gentiles, it's that they marry like religious Gentiles or the daughters of religious Gentiles. So it's an interesting, it's interesting that these are the people that, again, you wouldn't expect to marry somebody who was the daughter of a pagan priest. But Osnat, that lady, is the ancestor essentially of two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh's mother, Osnat, was the daughter, according to the Torah, of an Egyptian priest. So she was, those kids, their grandfather was one of those guys with the little ponytail and the shaved head, maybe with the eye makeup and offering up stuff to the gods. That's Ephraim and Manasseh's other grandfather. Their one grandfather is Jacob. That Jacob, right? Our Jacob, our ancestor, Israel. Their other one was that guy. Interesting to think about, by the way, when we think about Jewish families today that have some very interesting blending. It's always interesting to see the generations and the way that people, who your ancestors are. I always love, I've told you many times that I like the kids to learn about who their ancestors are and to learn about at least how their Jewish family got here to this country. But one of the things that I remember as a kid, not as a kid, I wasn't a kid, but when my little half brothers were over at Milken, that one of the kids who was at school with him was one of the descendants of Davy Crockett. And we always thought that this was cool, that one of Davy Crockett's descendants was Jewish and going to a Jewish high school. So I always thought that was kind of cool. That one of these American legends has a Jewish descendant. And clearly, well, not to say clearly, but There are stories about this going back to the Bible. People who, again, we know, I occasionally will meet people who will tell me that on their Christian side or the Gentile side of their family, people in our community or in other people that I've met over the years, that'll say, I have an ancestor who came over on the Mayflower, So we have these stories of again, how our ancestry and our American Jewish families have become blended. But I always take some, at least comfort in the knowledge that this is not the end of the Jewish community. And on the contrary, some of these people wind up becoming leaders of the Jewish community. Ephraim and Manasseh were leaders in their own right later on, or their tribes end up being. But Joseph is 30 years old.
And look at Jared Kushner, who marries Trump's daughter. Jared Kushner, very, very Orthodox Jew.
Yeah, that's true. So the current president of the United States,
right?
His grandkids, some of his grandkids are being raised Orthodox. They're at Orthodox Jewish day school.
Yes.
They're at school in Florida now, I think, or I think they're at school, or they're going to school in Florida, or they looked at a school in Florida. But yes, they're going to Orthodox school. So yeah,
it's what has happened to peace in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Because of this kind of thing happening.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to think about what will happen to people who will say, hey, my great grandfather was the president of the United States. And who knows, that person could wind up being a rabbi or being a teacher in a Jewish school one day.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll say, oh yeah, and of course they may not know it because they'll have a different last name, but look, we know it with Clinton's grandkids too. I've mentioned this before. 3 out of 5 of Biden's grandkids are raised Jewish too. So this is not a new phenomenon. The actual, and by the way, some of, not George W. Bush's, but some of George H.W. Bush's grandkids are part Jewish. I don't know if they've been raised Jewish yet, but one of Neil Bush's daughters married Ralph Lauren's son.
Right.
So now those kids are part Bush and part Lauren. But more importantly, that wasn't Ralph Lauren's name originally. It was Lifshitz. So you understand why he changed his name, but you can't imagine, Lifshitz on a label instead of Loren, but, or on a nice fragrance, Loren, Lifshitz. But yeah, some of those kids are half Lifshitz, half Bush. And that is America. That is what that's the world that we live in today, which is
exactly
rapidly becoming much more complex and perhaps exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph, as we said, is 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, which means he was 13 years in Egypt. 13 years.
Wow.
Slave and in jail. 13 years. That's a long time. It's a long time to be in jail and to be a slave for no reason at all. Now, of course, he's 30. Just to fill you in, he lives to be 110, so he gets 80 years of really good life. But he lost 13 years of his life, and he didn't just lose 13 years of his life. He lost the years of 17 to 30.
But he matured, and he lost his arrogance, and he lost his childish stupidity.
And one could argue that he needed to be chastised. The rabbis definitely feel that way. But did he have to be in prison and a slave in order to do that? It's a weird question to ask because, again, he lost those years that for most of us, many of us, those are some of the best years of our lives. Those are the years that some of us went to college, some of us got to travel, some of us got to have fun, we started a family, all those kinds of things that make your life, I would argue, kind of set you in the direction. And he spent that time, lots of it, not in control of his own life, not having freedom, not having the ability to do what he wanted to do. And again, he matured, he learned, he grew during that time.
Mm-hmm.
it was a tremendous sacrifice and life of hardship when other people his age are having a good time. And remember now, he's going right to work. He's got big responsibilities. So it's not like he gets out of jail at 30 and goes, I can party now. He's going right to work. He's got, again, the most important job arguably in the world. In the world. He's the one in charge of the empire. So he's got to get to work. And it says he leaves Pharaoh's presence, and Joseph traveled all through the land of Egypt. He gets right to work. He leaves Pharaoh's presence and went to work. Travels around, sees what's going on, understands what his job is. Would Joseph have traded those 13 years of his life for the next 80? I don't know. Doesn't matter. We don't get to make those choices. But I wonder if he ever thought about it. I wonder if he ever thought it was worth it. It's a weird question. During the 7 years of plenty, the land produced in abundance, and he gathered all the grain of the 7 years that the land of Egypt was enjoying, and stored the grain in the cities. He put in each city the grain of the fields around it. So Joseph collected produce in very large quantity, like the sands of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the years of famine came, Joseph became the father of 2 sons, whom Osanat, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. In case you had any question, did he have kids with other people? Doesn't say so. He had his 2 kids with her. Joseph named the first one Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget completely my hardship and my parental home. Now, what's interesting about that, well, let's read the second one. He named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. You understand why I asked the question, did Joseph ever feel like the trade-off was good? I don't know, because he named his kids some very interesting names here.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, in the other stories of his brothers, the mothers get to name the kids. Well, maybe they had Egyptian names that the mom gave, but the Hebrew names, the ones that we know him as, Ephraim and Manasseh and Ephraim, these names have a whole lot of meaning. We sometimes skip over this part because he had 2 kids. Isn't that great? He had a family. Yeah, but look what he just said. He just said that God made me forget my hardship. Meaning, again, I'm putting that behind me. But he also says it made me forget my parental home. It says here that God made him forget. I don't know. It's very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you think what's so interesting though is, again, Manasseh's, we always say Ephraim and Manasseh because that's the way the blessing goes. He blesses Ephraim first and Manasseh. Remember, we'll read that in a couple of weeks. He switches the blessing. But don't worry about the order right now. Well, actually, yeah, do look at the order, because look at the order that they're born. He says, God's made me forget what happened to me, the bad stuff, which is hard to believe, especially when you name your kid that, which means every time you say his name, you're saying that. Can you really forget it if you keep saying it every time?
Hardship and affliction.
Yeah. And it seems like if that's the case, the hardship and his parental home are both things that he wants to forget. Like, God made me forget it, which means like it's a blessing that God did it, we assume. But it doesn't it rings hollow here. And it also calls into question, so if he's forgotten where he came from, and if he's forgotten his hardships, why does he name his other son, Ephraim, God's made me fertile, well, that seems good, in the land of my affliction? Now, the first part, pareni, which is a word from paru, to be fertile, that sounds like Ephraim. The ani, my affliction, I mean, that doesn't necessarily seem like it's for sure has to be part of his name. It could be just fruitful, Ephraim. But Joseph says, in the land of my affliction. So if his life back home wasn't good, he doesn't say this place is also so great, because he calls it the land of my affliction. I don't know, folks. The takeaway from this is that this is a guy who's not at home in his new home, and he's not at home in his last home. It seems like this is a guy who has no place. It's really kind of tragic in a way.
Mhm.
God's made me forget my old days and given me good stuff in my place where it's been a place of affliction. It's a weird thing I'm calling your attention to, because we oftentimes pass over it and just say, oh, he named his kids Ephraim and Manasseh. But look at what he does here.
Mhm.
He takes stock of his life and where he's at. And he says, where am I at home? What's my place? And according to this, of course, they're born during the good times. The 7 years of abundance that the land of Egypt enjoyed came to an end. And the 7 years of famine set in, just as Joseph had foretold. And there was famine in all lands, everywhere. But throughout the land of Egypt, there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt felt the hunger, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Whatever he tells you to do, you shall do. Keep that in mind. Pharaoh just told the Egyptians, it's not up to me, it's up to Joseph. He's completely abdicated responsibility. It's Joseph's call. By the way, keep that in mind, because Pharaoh not taking responsibility and Joseph maybe overly taking responsibility may have been the reason why the Egyptians wound up hating us. Now, again, it's blaming the victims, and it's not a reason to justify anti-Semitism and slavery of the Jewish people and genocide of the Jewish people. But look at what Joseph does. When the famine became severe in the land, Joseph laid up open, that was all that was within, and rationed out the grain to the Egyptians. The famine, however, spread over the whole world. Okay, so Egypt has food, the rest of the world doesn't. So all the world came to Joseph to procure rations, for the famine had become severe throughout the land, in the whole world, throughout the world, the whole Haaretz. So Egypt becomes very successful because they have food and no one else does. Because they overgrew, because they knew what was going to happen. Because they had that insider information, they did really, really well. Which also begs the question, why didn't Joseph tell anybody else? Joseph knew this was going to happen. Which also begs the question, why does Joseph, for the next 10 years of being in power? Why does he never let his father know that he's alive? Why does Joseph forget where he came from? You never thought about that before, did you? Joseph had the ability, once he was out of jail and second only to Pharaoh, to send a message back to Canaan. Number one, to tell his dad he's still alive. Forget the brothers at this point. I mean, he could do whatever he wants with his brothers. He's powerful enough to send a whole army to kill his brothers if he really wanted to. But why didn't he let his dad know? What did he think his dad, did he think his dad didn't care about him? Maybe he thought his dad should have looked for him. Who knows? We don't know. It's all speculation. It's all in our own minds what happens here. But what we do know is Joseph did nothing to check on his family during this period, or to let them know that this was going to happen. He knows it's going to happen. When Jacob saw that there were food rations to be had in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? Now I hear," he went on, "that there are rations to be had in Egypt. Go down and procure rations for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get rations in Egypt. For Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, since he feared that he might meet with disaster. So what we know about Jacob is that even if he doesn't think the brothers were actually responsible for Joseph's death, they know this: he died under their watch. He died, and these guys weren't able to save him. And so he doesn't want Benjamin, his youngest, his other child with Rachel, to be with these guys. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't trust them. And these are all people, by the way, now that are in their 40s and 50s. Joseph's 30, which means these guys are in their 40s and 50s. Right? He doesn't trust Benjamin with them. And again, now Benjamin is a teenager at this point. Benjamin's about Joseph's age when he met with disaster at 17. So Benjamin's around that age. So Benjamin doesn't go down with the older brothers. And it says, "Thus the sons of Israel were among those who came to procure rations, for the famine extended to the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was the vizier of the land. It was he who dispensed rations to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground." Now, before we get into this scene, now one could say that the climax of the Joseph story is when Joseph comes out of prison and is made second in command. But it's not. That's not the climax of the story. The climax of the story is coming in next week's portion. Right? It's coming. It's not here yet. It's when Joseph reveals them. He doesn't reveal to them first who he is. Because when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger towards them, and he spoke harshly to them. He asked them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to procure food." For though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Of course they didn't. First of all, they assumed that their brother, if he was still alive, was a slave. They never would have assumed that he's now the second most powerful man in the world. But I also want to call your attention to this, which is that Joseph's brothers came and bowed to him, which is, of course, what Joseph said was going to happen all along.
Dream.
This was his dream, that they're all going to bow to him. So it exactly happened the way he said it would. But I want you to hear what this story also tells us, and we'll see it next week too. That the brothers come before him just like everybody else comes before Joseph and bow to him. So the question that people have asked, and rhetorically, because you know the answer to this, what was it like for Egyptians when they had to come and get food to come and bow down before a Jew? What did that do to the Egyptians? Now, not only is he a foreigner, not only do they spread, again, talking about him behind his back. This guy came here as a slave. This guy came here as was a prisoner before he came here. This guy had an affair with his, you could just imagine the stories that they told about Joseph. And Joseph knew it. We know Joseph's smart. Not only is he smart, he has dreams. He knows things. You don't think he knew that everybody talked about him behind his back? And most importantly, what did that dynamic do for Jews eventually in Egypt when they're all down there? That the Jew that was in charge was somebody that everybody either became jealous of, hated, resentful of. How does a Jew come to our country and become in charge of us? Look, we've heard this throughout history. It happened in Spain during the Middle Ages. One of the reasons why the Inquisition was started was to get rid of Jewish debts by the Spanish court. It happened during the Holocaust, where one of the charges that the Nazis, were able to excite the people of Germany over was that the Jews had taken too much economic power during the Weimar Republic. That there were Jewish businessmen that were disproportionately wealthy while German peasants were starving. Was it true? It wasn't 100% true. There were a lot of poor Jews in Germany in the late 1920s during the Depression, the worldwide Depression. But there were also some very, very wealthy Jews in Germany. There's no question. Just like there were in America. And in Germany, which had a history of anti-Semitism before, it was definitely a source of animosity. One of the first things that the Nuremberg laws did when Hitler came to power and started passing the Nuremberg laws in 1935 was one of the Nuremberg laws where that Gentile women could no longer be servants in Jewish homes. Now, while that doesn't seem like that important or that memorable in the scheme of Jewish history during the Holocaust, especially, it does tell us a little something about what was going on in the mentality of the average German person. That a law like that could be passed is essentially keep those Jewish wealthy merchants and business people off of our good Aryan women in a power position where they can be taken advantage of. Or again, that they should be humiliated by working for a Jew. That was a law. In addition to throwing Jews out of universities and telling Jewish businesses that they couldn't, open in certain areas, that was one of the Nuremberg laws. So the Jews have taken on too much power is definitely a subtext in the Joseph story that we oftentimes forget. It's going to be very clear. And actually, Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory wrote about this last year when we looked at this portion. We talked a little bit about what Joseph does wrong. Maybe again wasn't all his fault, but did he humiliate the Egyptian people? And did Pharaoh, to some extent, put him in that role by saying, I ain't involved. He's the one he'll tell you what to do. It's not me. He'll tell you what to do. So that Joseph became the one that people hated. The average Egyptian ate it. We'll get to that. Recalling the dreams that he had dreamed about them, Joseph said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the land in its nakedness." So he recalled the dreams. And notice what he says here, that you are here and you're up to no good. But they said to him, "No, my lord, truly your servants have come to procure food. We are all of us sons of the same man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." And he said to them, "No, you have come to see the land in its nakedness." And they replied, "We are your servants." And here's the powerful scene right here, too. 1 second. Phone stopped ringing. "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one is no more." Now, they don't say he's dead, but the implication is he's not around anymore. Now, of course, they're saying that to the guy that is that one, the one that's no more. They've just admitted, but not really admitted, again, that there was another one. Now, did Joseph take comfort in the fact that they never forgot him? I mean, they acknowledged him. Or did this just rub salt in the wound? By the way, they don't say Jacob's name. And again, they didn't have to say Jacob's name, but it is interesting that they say we're the sons of one father. They don't say we have 4 different mothers. It's not relevant. And more importantly, they're sons of one father. And wondering whether Joseph, when he heard those words, "Anachnu b'nei ish echad," we're sons of one father, whether those words resonated with Joseph. What did he think about that when he heard we're all sons of one father? But Joseph said to them, "It's just as I've told you, you are spies. By this you shall be put to the test. Unless your younger brother comes here, by Pharaoh, you shall not depart from this place. Let one of you go and bring your brother, while the rest of you remain confined, that your words may be put to the test, whether there is truth in you. Else by Pharaoh, you are nothing but spies." Notice, by the way, he says by Pharaoh, Chai Pharaoh, by the life of Pharaoh. That's what Chai Pharaoh means, by the life of Pharaoh. He doesn't say by God, he doesn't say I swear by God. Can't say that because, again, they don't know who he is. But he says by the life of Pharaoh. Yeah. He says it twice. Chai Pharaoh in line 15 and then Chai Pharaoh in line 16. By the life of Pharaoh. And he confined them in the guardhouse for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you shall live, for I am a God-fearing man." So here he says, I fear God. Right? There he says, I fear God. He doesn't use Pharaoh, he says God. "If you are honest men, let one of you be held in place of your detention, while the rest of you go and take home rations for your starving households." So he says, okay, instead of letting one go back, I'll let you all go back and one stays. Changes his mind. He's willing to give them a chance. He says, because it seems like right now he wants to get Benjamin down there. Which again, you could argue that he wants to save Benjamin. But doesn't he have the power just to take his chariots and ride up, bring Benjamin back down if he really does care about Benjamin so much? Or is he just wanting to see what his brothers will do? Is he just testing them? I'm going to see what they're going to do. And by the way, he tells them, take home rations for your starving households. He doesn't say you can feed yourself, but so you can feed your households, your kids. Remember why you came here. You came here to feed your families. And if you don't do what I say, you're not going to be able to feed your families. But he says, you must bring your youngest brother that your words may be verified and that you may not die. And they did accordingly. So he says, you don't have a choice. Because otherwise I'll kill you. They said to one another, alas, we are being punished on account of our brother, because we looked on his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. That is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben spoke up and said, did I not tell you, do no wrong to the boy? But you paid no heed. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. So Joseph hears this whole exchange that they're having with each other in Hebrew. And they go right to the thing that they did. To him, not realizing, of course, that it's Joseph. So this story is very, very complex, very dramatic, really well staged, very, very detailed. Because it says that this is the conversation that they have in front of Joseph. And that Reuben, who's the one who wanted to save him in the first place, says, I told you not to do anything wrong. And this is why. You're going to pay karma.
Right. So
It's not really karma, but it's measure for measure. We say karma, but it's not really, that's not what karma is. They did not know that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between him and them. So all this time, we just heard something we didn't know before, which is that Joseph has been using an interpreter the whole time. Why? Because he doesn't want them to know that he knows who they are, that he's a Hebrew. They don't want, he's doing this full act for him. And they don't know that everything that they just said, even the stuff that they said. So assumedly that the interpreter, when they said something to the interpreter, they said it in a louder voice, or they said it in a way that they clearly were talking to the interpreter. Please tell Joseph, blah, 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 or Zaphanath Paneah. Please tell him, blah, blah, blah. Then they turn to each other and Reuben says, didn't I tell you this was what was going to happen? So they assume that the interpreter is not interpreting that part. That's not got subtitles. But Joseph doesn't need subtitles. He knows everything they just said. That's the great gimmick here in this story, is that they're talking to each other and Joseph understands what they said. And something very powerful happens here at this moment. He turned away from them and wept. But he came back to them and spoke to them. And he took Shimon, Simon, from among them and had him bound up before their eyes.
Why did it pick Shimon?
Now, one can make the argument, it's weird, right, that he would take him. Because you could make the argument, you take Reuben because he's the oldest. But he just heard Reuben say that Reuben never wanted to do this. So if he's playing a game with somebody, well, he didn't want to do it to Reuben because Reuben was right. It was actually the righteous one of this not very righteous group of brothers, his brothers. So one can make the argument the next oldest brother is Shimon. Now, the rabbis give another reason why it's Shimon. Shimon is the scariest of the brothers in the sense that this is the guy that can go absolutely crazy. This guy is violent. Shimon and Levi were the ones that went into Shechem and killed everybody, all the men. This guy is the toughest and craziest of the brothers. And if anybody's going to be held, Joseph does this, number one, because Shimon has a violent streak in him, and I don't want to say deserves it, but but also Joseph is saying, look, to the brothers. Now, they don't know that he knows this insider information about Shimon, but the brothers do. And the brothers look at the brother that just got taken away. And this is the brother that if anybody's going to go berserk right now, it's him. And he can't do anything. And the Torah is even more descriptive here. Look at the words. He bound him before their eyes. He didn't just lead him out and then bind him later. He took Shimon and put him in handcuffs, essentially, right in front of him. I'm going to show you how powerful I am. I'm going to take the most powerful of you, and I'm going to bind him right in front of all of you. And you can't do anything about it. So think about the power move that Joseph just made. He just humiliated them and did it in a way that they wouldn't even know that he would know that. So that's an interesting piece of why Shimon. But again, Shimon is usually considered one of the more violent of the boys, if not the most violent. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, return each one's money to his sack, and give them provisions for the journey. And this was done for them. So they loaded their asses with the rations and departed from there. As one of them was opening his sack to give feed to his ass at the night encampment, he saw his money right there in the mouth of his bag. And he said to his brothers, my money has been returned. It's here in my bag. And their hearts sank, and trembling, they turned to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us, by the way? Not what's happened to us, not what has Pharaoh or Joseph done to us, or Zaphanah Paneah. What has God done to us? So they're upset because they're like, oh my gosh, they're going to think we stole it. We didn't pay. He already thought we're spies. Now he's going to think we're thieves. We're done. We can't go back. When they came back to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had befallen them, saying, the man who is the Lord of the land spoke harshly to us and accused us of spying on the land. We said to him, we're honest men. We've never been spies. Now, again, let me just look back here. When they first, when he first tells them, he says, you're spies to come seek out the land in its nakedness, right? Truly your servants have come to procure food. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies, right? So they say, we're honest men. We've never been spies. Now, when they go back to their father, they say the same thing. We're honest men. We've never been spies. Now, we know, Joseph knows, but Jacob doesn't know, but maybe he suspects. They may not have been spies, but they're not honest. They got right in front of Joseph and said, we're honest men. So this is not, I mean, these are Shimon and Levi who told the people of Shechem, we'll circumcise you and then you can marry us. And then they went in and killed everybody. I mean, these are not honest men. They're deceptive and oftentimes violent men. If the first thing is not true, it could be that the second part's not true either. So did Joseph believe them that they weren't spying? What difference does it make? The bottom line is they lied right in front of Joseph and said, we're honest men. They could have just said, we're not spies. But they hung themselves to some extent by saying that they're honest men. There were 12 of us brothers, sons by the same father, but one is no more. And the youngest is now with our father in the land of Canaan. So they repeat to their father what they had said. And here's where it gets funny, because now they say, but the man who is Lord of the land said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me and take something for your starving households and be off. Well, that's all true. That's all true. I mean, that's all what he said to him. And bring your youngest brother to me, that I may know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will then restore your brother to you, and you shall be free to move about in the land. So Joseph uses their affirmation that they're honest to try to see whether they're really honest, which of course we know why he's really doing this. He's doing this to mess with them. As they're emptying their sacks, there in each one sack was his money bag. When they and their father saw their money bags, they were dismayed. Their father Jacob said to them, it is always me that you bereave. Joseph is no more, Shimon is no more. And now you would take away Benjamin? These things always happen to me. And here Jacob just lets them have it. What's interesting, of course, is that he now puts Shimon in the same category as Joseph, which is he's gone. He's gone. Doesn't say he's dead, but if he thinks Joseph's dead, then Shimon is in the same place. So he basically just said, nothing we can do about him now. And most importantly, you guys keep getting me into trouble. It's always you guys getting me in trouble, causing me grief. These things always happen to me. So he's now looking at the fact that if Benjamin gets taken, then he loses 25% of his family, his kids. I mean, they're gone. He loses 3 of his sons. That's what he says he's facing. Reuben said to his father, you may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I will return him to you. But he said, Jacob said, my son must not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he alone is left. If he meets with disaster on the journey you are taking, you will send my white head down into Sheol in grief, which means I will die in grief. Now, he's already said he's going to die in grief when Joseph dies. But he says if Benjamin, the other son of Rachel, dies, that's it. I'm dead. I'm going to die. So he says, it's not happening. It's not happening. And here he finally full out says his brother is dead. Joseph is dead. And I can't lose him too. Now, again, you could say, well, the other 10 brothers are standing around there going, but what about us? Or 9 brothers now at this point, because Reuben's the leader. Shimon's back down there. Reuben's talking to him. What about us? You still got 9 kids, but they can't say that. And Jacob says, it's not that, these are 2 brothers of the same mom. If they go, Rachel's legacy is over. It's like Rachel never existed anymore. Can't lose him. Now remember, he thinks Joseph died when he was 17. Benjamin's roughly 17. These kids haven't had children yet. They haven't had kids. They haven't procreated. There's no line of Rachel if they go. And by the way, think about that line of Rachel.
Mhm.
Think about that line of Rachel. That line of Rachel produces the leaders of Ephraim and Manasseh, those tribes that are very important later on. They also produce the sons and daughters and descendants of Benjamin. Folks, King Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. His daughter Michal, who becomes King David's wife, is from the tribe of Benjamin. Folks, Mordecai, the savior of the Jews with Esther, are from the tribe of Benjamin. If something happens to this family, this side of the family, these people, they're not going to be there. Now, he doesn't say that like that, but the implication is we know from Jewish history, can't let these people disappear. And so he says, I'm not going to risk another son. It's not going down. And Reuben even says, well, wait a second. If anything happens to Benjamin, you can kill my two sons. Now that seems like a weird, and people forget about that little part there, Reuben's part. Reuben says, I have kids. Assumedly, maybe he has only two kids. Kill off my line. Kill my line off if anything happens to Benjamin and the Rachel line. Just kill him. Now, in the Torah, he doesn't say anything about this to Reuben. But the Midrash does. The Midrash has Jacob saying to Reuben, what is killing your kids do to me to bring these other kids back? On the contrary, they're my kids too. They're my grandkids. But I'm killing two more of my grandkids? So no, it doesn't mean anything to me. You justifying or guaranteeing or saying you can do this, you didn't take care of Joseph. Why should I think? And that's why he says, again, two sons, because I'm responsible for Joseph. I was responsible for Joseph, and I'm responsible for Benjamin. So if they die, then two of my sons deserve to die. Jacob doesn't respond. You could argue just Jacob doesn't need to respond because it's a stupid thing to say. Wait a minute. The Midrash says it flat out. We read it a few weeks ago in our Midrash class on Tuesday. He says to them, they're my grandsons. They're already my grandsons. They're mine. Doesn't equate. Giving up more of what's mine doesn't make any sense. And so here's the way this last section sets us up. This is the last part of it. We'll finish with this today. Perfect timing. But the famine in the land was severe. And when they had eaten up the rations which they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go again and procure some food for us. But Judah said to him, the man warned us, do not let me see your faces unless your brother is with you. So now we get Judah popping in there, the other brother who tried to save Joseph, or make the argument did. Judah's idea to sell him into slavery back in chapter 37. If you will let our brother go with us, we will go down and procure food for you. But if you will not let him go, we will not go down. For the man said to us, do not let me see your faces unless your brother's with you. And notice here it says Israel. Israel said, why did you serve me so ill as to tell this man that you had another brother? Right? Why did you open your mouth in the first place? That's an example of Jacob, Israel saying, you guys are dumb. You gave away too much information. You gave away information that you didn't need to give. And now it's being used against us. They replied, but the man kept asking us about our family, saying, is your father still living? Have you another brother? And we answered him accordingly. How are we to know? He would say, bring your brother here. So they basically said, well, We got kind of tricked into it. Then Judah said to his father Israel, send the boy in my care and let us be on our way, that we may live and not die, for you and we and our children. We're going to die if we don't get this food. What difference does it make whether you send Benjamin? Because if we don't go down, everybody's dead. That's Judah's point. And then he says, I myself will be surety for you. You may hold me responsible if I do not bring him back to you and set him before you. I shall stand guilty before you forever. And then he says, for we could have been there and back twice if we had not dawdled. And so Judah kind of confronts his father and says, you're arguing about this right now. We already could have been there and back. We're wasting time. So Judah is pretty forceful here in this story. Father Israel said to them, if it is so, do this. Take some of the choice products of the land in your baggage and carry them down as a gift for the man. Some balm and some honey, gum, laudanum, pistachio nuts, and almonds. And again, botnim is translated here as pistachio nuts. There's some kind of nut. But this is, these are not things that you can live on. They're nice to have, make people feel good, but they're not food. So go down and give them some of our good stuff that we have in our land. Some of the things that we have to offer. Like maybe that'll make him feel good. And then he says, take with you double the money, carry back with you the money that was replaced in the mouths of your bag, and perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother too, and go back at once to that man. So he gives him the brother. He says, take Benjamin. And may El Shaddai dispose the man to mercy towards you, that he may release to you your older brother, as well as Benjamin. As for me, if I am to be bereaved, I shall be bereaved. So he says, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Now, yesterday in Torah, in the Midrash class, I told you something interesting. I forgot that we were going to read the word today. It's funny how that happens. We had a discussion about this word yesterday in Hebrew. And we had it just today. Just today. Do you remember what the word is, folks? Anybody who was there yesterday on Tuesday? Yesterday. It was only yesterday. Mike was there.
I was there, but
El Shaddai.
Diane was there, but she came in late. You missed this part, maybe.
It's El Shaddai.
What?
El Shaddai. El Shaddai.
El Shaddai did come up. You're right. One of the names of God. But this had to do with family. I don't know if you were here, Francine. I was talking about how we have words in Hebrew for family that we don't have in English. What?
No,
Machatanim.
I said that was one of the words, right? In-laws. We don't have a good word for machatanim, for relatives that are relatives by marriage. We say in-laws, but usually.
And cousin.
Yeah, well, cousins, we don't have a good word in Hebrew, but the other word I told you, which is really powerful that we have, is this word right here. Shacholti. I told you that in Hebrew, we have a word which we don't have in English. We have a word in Hebrew to be bereaved of a child. When we lose somebody, in Hebrew, we say we're an avel. That's somebody who's lost a parent, a sibling, a spouse, a friend. We're an avel. We're in mourning and we're bereaved. But we have a special word for somebody who's lost a child in Hebrew, a shachol. A shacholti here is, I will be one of those bereaved of my child, which I think they should have translated, They just translate it as bereaved, but it literally means to be bereft of a child. And I told you yesterday, it's very powerful that we have a word for it in Hebrew, and we should have a word for it in English. There should be a word for that horrific experience that somebody has. Because if you say that you're in mourning, people can offer you a condolence and everyone's lost somebody. But the horrific experience of losing a child puts somebody in a position of loss that nobody should ever have. And when somebody's experienced that loss, they are in a different realm of having suffered. And we have a word for it in Hebrew, but we don't have a word for it in English. So this is what Jacob is expressing right here. And I want to tell you, it's very weird that I just talked about it yesterday with people. I forgot that it's used in this week's portion. And Jacob seems to be resigned for the fact that he's going to have to do that again. And it seems to be that because he's done it before. I've been here before. And the prospect of being bereft of all my children if they die of hunger is not something I want to deal with. So the men took that gift and they went down with double the money as well as Benjamin. They made their way down to Egypt, where they presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to his house steward, "Take the men into the house, slaughter and prepare an animal, for the men will dine with me at noon." Which again, not for dinner, lunch. They're having lunch. The man did as Joseph said, and he brought the men to Joseph's house. But the men were frightened at being brought to Joseph's house. It must be, they thought, because of the money replaced in our bags the first time, that he may have brought us inside as a pretext to attack us and to seize us as slaves with our pack animals. So they don't look at this private audience as something good. They believe this is the end of the road for them. So they went to Joseph's house steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. "If you please, my lord," they said, "we came down once before to procure food. But when we arrived at the night it came and opened our bags, there was each one's money in the mouth of the bag, our money in full. So we've brought it back with us. We've brought down with us other money to procure food. We do not know who put the money in our bags." So they tell the guy that works for Joseph, "We don't know how it happened. We didn't want it to happen." There's a midrash, by the way, and we looked at it a couple months ago on Tuesday, was that the house steward is actually none other than Manasseh, his oldest son. But he was already training Manasseh in the family business and had put him in charge. So that they're actually talking to Manasseh, their nephew. They don't know that either. Maybe not. I don't know if that midrash is so important, but the important thing is that Joseph has somebody he trusts in this little game he's playing. He replied, "All is well with you. Do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, must have put treasure in your bags for you. I got your payment." And he brought Shimon to them. Then the man brought the men into Joseph's house. He gave them water to bathe their feet, and then food provided for their asses. So he takes care of them physically, for their animals, everything else. They laid out the gifts to await Joseph's arrival at noon, for they had heard that they were to dine there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts that they had brought with them into the house, bowing low before him to the ground. He greeted them and he said, "How is your aged father of whom you spoke? Is he still in good health?" Now notice that they give him these presents. And again, this is the most powerful man in the world next to Pharaoh. What's this guy going to do with their trinkets? This guy has anything he could possibly want. And they've given him these things. And he doesn't even acknowledge them. He gets them and they bow to him. And what does he say? "How's your father?" And they replied, "It is well with your servant, our father. He is in good health, still in good health." And they bowed and made obeisance. Again, they bowed to him. Looking about, he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. And he asked, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke?" And he went on, "May God be gracious to you, my boy." With that, Joseph hurried out, for he was overcome with feeling toward his brother. and was on the verge of tears. He went into a room and he wept there. So he was on the verge of tears in front of them, but he can't hold it back. He sees his brother Benjamin and he weeps. And he weeps. And then he washed his face and he reappeared. And now in control of himself, he gave the order, serve the meal. They served him by himself and them by themselves. And the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. For the Egyptians could not dine with the Hebrews, since that would be abhorrent to the Egyptians. So it tells us right here that the Egyptians would not eat with the brothers. And they were seated by his direction, as they were seated in his direction, from the eldest in order of seniority to the youngest, the order of his youth. The men looked at one another in astonishment. Portions were served from his table, but Benjamin's portion was several times that of anyone else. And they drank their fill with him. So they keep pouring food onto Benjamin's plate. Then he instructed his house steward as follows: fill the men's bags with food, as much as they can carry, and put each one's money in the mouth of his bag. Put my silver goblet in the mouth of the bag of the youngest one, together with his money for the rations. Same thing, except this time in Benjamin's bag, they put the cup, the silver goblet. And they did as Joseph had told them. With the first light of morning, the men were sent off with their pack animals. Notice, by the way, the importance of that meal. That meal, again, meals being important in the story of Joseph and the Jacob cycle. The animals, when they're men, they go back after the morning, the next day. They had just left the city and had not gone too far, when Joseph said to his steward, "Go up after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why did you repay good with evil?' It is the very one from which my master drinks and which he uses for divination." Divination, which is that he seems to like at least be saying he does magic. It was a wicked thing for you to do. And he overtook them and spoke those words to them. And they said to him, "Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything of the kind." Now, remember, this trick had already been played on them. Don't you think maybe they would check their bags this time? I don't know. They didn't. Who knows? Here we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money that we found in the mouths of those bags. How then could we have stolen any silver or gold from your master's house? We brought back money. Whichever of your servants is found shall die. The rest of us, moreover, shall become slaves to my Lord. He replied, "Although what you are proposing is right, only the one with whom is found shall be my slave, but the rest of you shall go free." So each one hastened to lower his bag to the ground, and each one opened his bag. He searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the goblet turned up in Benjamin's bag. At this, they rent their clothes. Vayikra'u simloto. Look at the clothes. Their clothes get torn. They tore their brother's coat. Now their coat gets torn. All their clothes, again, their clothes are torn. Each reloaded his pack animal, and they returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers re-entered the house of Joseph, who was still there, they threw themselves on the ground before him. Folks, this is the climax. Joseph said to them, "What is this deed you have done? Do you not know that a man like me practices divination?" So Joseph seems to get hung up on this. And again, he created this story, but he's going to say that this is because it takes away my mojo. This is my magic cup. We're done. Don't worry, guys, because guess where the climax ends? Right here in the middle of the story. Judah replied, "What can we say to my Lord? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered the crime of your servants. Here we are then, slaves of my Lord. The rest of us, as much as he who's in possession of the goblet is found. So if you're going to punish one, you're going to punish every one of us. So they stand up for Benjamin. But he replied, far be it from me to act thus. No, only he who is in possession of the goblet shall be my slave. The rest of you go back in peace to your father. It's the end of the story.
That sure didn't end happy.
Did not end happy either, other than it does end with the word Leshalom al avichem, that you'll go back in peace to your father. One could argue that, the words
Yeah, but daddy's not going to be happy.
peace of your, the peace, the shalom of your father. Yes. Now, this is one of those examples, though. Forget, is it a happy ending or a sad ending? This is a cliffhanger, folks. This is literally like, the soap opera that ends right in the middle of this confrontation, or, the old movies, the old, movies.
And they don't usually end on a cliffhanger either, usually, to our
Nope.
portion.
Portions almost always end with some kind of conclusion, right?
Right.
Well, we know what happened.
I'm just assuming they ended it here because it was so long.
That's a good possibility, right? That is probably actually part of the issue. But there has to be a reason why, again, when we pick up this portion next week, that we pick it up mid-stride, because you can make the argument that they could have ended the story. Listen, where the Christians ended the chapter, this is not a good place of ending the chapter.
No,
This is a stupid break.
this really shouldn't be a chapter.
No, but again, it could have been a length thing. Here it's
Right.
get to 34 verses and it's about the end of it. The story really, a natural break for the story would be, maybe you could make the argument.
When they left.
Yeah, when they left. But again, that's not as much of a cliffhanger in the sense that, but it's still mid-story.
It's still mid-story, but it's a good end. It could end there, though.
But here's the weird thing about it that you're pointing out. This is a really long story.
Right.
This is not a story in the normal biblical sense of this is written in shorthand. That's
like a novel.
Yep. And it's choreographed. The scenes are set up. The drama, the tension.
It's teaching, however. Maybe they've got to have all this in order to teach those of us what we need to learn.
It is a very graphic and very detailed and very powerful story.
Yes.
And it's an interesting one because, again, there are other stories you could make the argument that we really want to know more about. The Cain and Abel story, for example, is such a weird story that it's like 5 lines and you want to know, well, how did Cain and Abel, was there a backstory to that? Did they have other, we're actually missing a line from that story. We know that because, again, we found it we found a couple words in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which kind of help us a little bit. But there's that story's completely missing all context, really, of it's so we have to figure out everything that's going on in there. But this story is so detailed. Again, Joseph turning aside and going into the other room and crying, and the scene that, it says he's overcome with emotion, but then he goes in the other room and cries. It's so detailed. Just that one scene, just that one visual, forget the whole scene. It's just that one part of the scene is so visual and so powerful, so dramatic. So it's a really interesting story. And again, it's one that really occupies 2 different.
But what's the moral of the story? Don't sell your brother. I say this because my uncle, he was 10 years older than my mother, tried to sell her at the park when she was a baby.
That is, I guess he didn't know the story. He was too.
No, he must not have known the story.
But
And we also learn that money won't make up for it. You bring the money The old money, you add money to it. You can't make up really bad mistakes with money.
Yeah.
And we need to learn that too.
Money can't buy you love. Sounds like a song.
Money doesn't buy you, and money doesn't buy you forgiveness.
Right.
Well, and there's another
Life.
and there's another part with Joseph being deceptive in multiple ways. He's deceived his brothers, and he's deceived even what's going on with his life with his kids.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, he's living a
that's
lie.
part of his vengeance.
Joseph is definitely living a lie.
Yeah.
And what we actually see in this next portion, we're going to see the consequence of his living this lie in front of the Egyptians too, because we actually see there actually is a great reaction shot of the Egyptians. That's why I'm saying this story is very, very detailed. I mean, we get
Very
a little
deep.
of the Egyptians because the Egyptians can't sit at the same table with them. But we also get this wonderful scene when Joseph finally is kind of like overcome and asks that he breaks down again.
Mm-hmm.
And the Egyptians see it and hear it. And this sticks in their mind too. He doesn't want them to see, he clearly doesn't want them to see him in this moment of weakness, but he can't conceal it from them. So yes, he's living a lie that's also affecting the way he's being perceived, or he wants to be perceived by the Egyptians. So yeah, it's a really powerful lesson in who we really are and who we try to be when we're with people who don't know our whole story, so to speak, who don't really know where we came from and what makes us who we are, and only sees us in the finished product. And by the way, we sometimes take for granted that they see us the way we want, the way we're hoping to see them. We don't know that the Egyptians ever really fully accepted Joseph. We don't know whether the Egyptians ever respected Joseph. You know, the assumption is that, or his assumption is that they do, but maybe they didn't.
He ran the country for 7 years in great times and 7 years during famine. So he was in charge for, that we know, 14 years.
Yep. Now, this is a guy whose life, again, is been shaped by tragedy and by experiences that people shouldn't ever have to have.
By your own family.
And yet wanting vengeance turns out not to be a really great thing.
Well, and that's why we make the argument that the reason why this story is so detailed, and the reason why this story is at the end of Genesis, is because it teaches us the most important lesson, which is that when it comes down to it, we have to forgive and we have to make peace with our family. We can't hold on to those things. And again, I'm not going to ruin the story because we're going to get to it. But there's a reason why the first family we read about, we don't really know what's going on in that story, is the Cain and Abel story. But by this point, by the end of Genesis, we have a family. Again, let's see it. You kind of know what happens. That they make peace with each other, and there is a possibility for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
This is the lesson, you could say, and the reason why this story is so elaborate and why it's at the end of the book, why it takes up so much of the last part of the book. Again, we have 5 lines of Cain and Abel story. 5 lines, 4 lines. We have 10 chapters or 8 chapters dealing with this final scene of Joseph and his brothers. So 8 chapters, I mean, 200 and something verses, or not 200, but 200 and about 200 verses, 200 something verses in this final story. It's mind-blowing when you think about the detail in this story in the Bible. So you have to, we're in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks, we got to come back next week. You have to be here next week. I I feel bad for those who weren't here this week because they miss to come. Usually I say every Torah portion kind of stands alone. Doesn't necessarily have to be read with the previous portion. Not with Vayigash. Vayigash is literally mid story. So I hope we don't have too many people who weren't there last week because they will have not gotten the full context of this story. Well, anyways, happy Hanukkah, everybody. I know we ran a little late. It's a very long portion, and next week's portion actually isn't long. Vayigash starts here and goes, well, hold on, sorry. It starts right here. Sorry, no, I was right. It was further down. So Vayigash starts here in chapter 44, 18, and Vayigash goes to 40. It goes to, I went too far. It goes to, sorry. Wait a second.
I'm gonna say goodnight. I'm getting dizzy.
No, we're going. It doesn't matter. It goes to right here. It goes to right to, it's the last chapter, Vayechi, that's really short. Well, anyways, happy Hanukkah, everybody.
Thank you,
I want
Rabbi.
everybody
Thank
to
you,
again
Rabbi.
Thank
stay
you.
healthy and enjoy Hanukkah. Please,
Happy Hanukkah, everybody.
Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Love
Thank
you,
you.
Joyce.
Love you.
See you
Love
soon.
you all.
We'll see you soon. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye, Rabbi.
Bye.
Love you.